Growing up here, I really I'm always going to love the climate. I love the sun.
We love our Florida beaches. It's what makes Florida, Florida.
Those sandy beaches are some of the most important sea turtle nesting habitat on Earth, and they're also incredibly important to people.
This has been my playground since 1956.
It is the most valuable asset we have.
Beaches are part of the lifeblood, the soul of the state of Florida. And those beaches are under threat right now. On one side, you have often inappropriate beachfront development that's encroaching right onto the beach. At the same time, we have the effects of climate change and sea level rise.
Florida is really ground zero for the impacts of sea level rise and climate change.
We're talking about billions and billions of dollars of exposure.
With impacts to the urban environment and the natural systems upon which our entire economy is so very dependent.
The resource is disappearing. With sea level rise, we have less and less beach.
Sea level is going up, and as the climate warms, it'll go up at a faster and faster rate.
We should be planning for this. It's ludicrous that we are still playing games with it.
The battle to try to save properties from erosion is leading to things like the construction of seawalls, repeated beach nourishment, and our beaches and sea turtles that nest on those beaches are really caught in the middle.
This is a state that from its very early days was focused on selling waterfront property.
We've lined our shoreline with intense coastal development.
We're committing ourselves increasingly to very hazardous and dangerous areas. Who's going to pay the cost for that?
We're not addressing these issues in a intelligent, I would say it's a greedy manner, is driving our coastal zone planning.
By the time that I am 60 years of age, sea levels will have risen 2 to 4 feet. And in 2100, they're predicted to rise 6 feet, 7, 8, 9. Some scientists predict that they could rise even higher than 10 feet. And if I can understand this at 16 years of age, we need to ask why our so-called leaders avoid and deny the topic.
The biggest problem for Florida with climate change is going to be sea level rise.
We know we have data that demonstrates that the sea is rising and that it's rising more quickly, more recently.
Florida is one of the states that we know to be most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and sea level rise for a number of reasons, because we're so flat, low-lying, we have vulnerable water supplies, kind of the confluence of all of the very severe circumstances in a relatively small geographic area.
Over 90% of the heat that has been generated by global warming is been transferred to the oceans. It's the oceans that's heating up much more than the atmosphere.
On a warming Earth, two things cause the level of the sea to increase. One is the warming of the ocean because warm water expands, and the second is the melting of continental ice.
Even using the U.S. government projections, we could be at 2 feet by 2048 and 3 feet further sea level rise by 2065. And when you look at the real estate and just the housing and the infrastructure and the need to relocate vast numbers of people, we should be planning for this. It's ludicrous that we are still playing games with it.
You think about sea level rise and you think about it sort of creeping up on you, but of course what happens is we get storms. And the storm will come in whoosh. Well, the same storm with 2 more feet of sea level rise is a much bigger whoosh. And so these episodic events, the storms, are going to take out more and more and more each time.
South Florida is very unique because we have a very porous geology, and no matter what we do in the way of the shoreline, we still have to worry about water that comes up beneath our feet.
This is the type of limestone that South Florida sits on, and almost all of Florida sits on limestone. It's unbelievably porous, and for this reason, if we get a 10-inch rain here, it'll disappear down the ground, but as the ocean level rises, it's just going to come right on through. And so we can't play New Orleans or the Netherlands here.
Florida is perhaps the most exposed area on Earth in terms of economic consequences of sea level rise.
You can't say the word climate change if you work for the state of Florida. You can't put it in a memo. You can't, the phrase was banished from the lexicon of bureaucracy, which is absurd. And again, once again, we were the laughing stock of the country when this made the newspapers.
The people that we elect right now in Florida are permitting high-rise condominiums right on top of the dune overlooking the ocean that's coming up. The ocean is going to gut all those ground floor homes, and if those people think they're going to make that an investment to leave to their children, they're going to be surprised. They sign that, it's in the fine print, but they acknowledge that they're buying in harm's way, like buying a home on the shores of the Missouri River or the Mississippi River. This is a hell of a lot bigger than the Mississippi River. And if you buy on top of the dune here in any of the Florida communities, you are buying in harm's way.
We have subsidies that reduce the risk on the homeowner, but pass the risk on to the general public through insurance subsidies both at the state level and at the federal level. You can literally build your house on the edge of the beach, have it wash away or blow away, and then you can rebuild it in the exact same location over and over again.
Insurance policy, our policies regarding subsidies, need to reflect the fact that we have rising sea levels. Essentially what we need to do is back away from the shoreline and have public policies that accommodate that. And that way we can have a healthy shoreline and a populace that's much less exposed to the dangers of massive storms and flooding.
Since we're all paying for both low-cost insurance and for the methods of protecting our beach, then we all should have a say in how we develop our coastline. Seawalls are becoming much more common as a strategy in Florida to protect properties along the beach that were initially built too close to the water. Somewhere between 15 and 24% of Florida's beaches are now lined with concrete and wooden seawalls.
Putting a barrier on the beach impedes that natural accretion and erosion, which is so critical to the barrier islands here, and also causes erosion on adjacent areas to the armoring structures.
Building seawalls is about the worst thing you can do if you're trying to protect your beaches. Seawalls enhance erosion. You start a never-ending cycle. The beach erodes, you build a seawall, your neighbor's property erodes because of the seawall that you just built, then they build a seawall, destroying the beach in the process of protecting their personal property.
The default policy of the state, in the absence of addressing the issues of encroachment by construction, has been to nourish the beach. That is, to dredge it up, put sand on the beach.
Long term, that is a relatively unsustainable policy unless we combine it with lots of other things, like moving landward when we can, less building of seawalls. Putting sand on the beach forever on more and more of Florida's sandy beaches is going to get much more expensive and much more difficult as the seas continue to rise.
One of the key things that we can all be aware of as Floridians are the well-being of the nesting beaches.
Sea turtles are so important because they're really an indicator species. They tell us how our beaches and marine environment are doing. If turtles are doing well, generally speaking, beaches and our coastal resources are doing well. So it's really important that we understand issues that are affecting them and their habitats.
Go and see the turtle and you will be a changed person. To see turtles emerging from a nest at night and running for the sea, I've seen people virtually weep.
Sea turtles are amazing creatures, and I see them as warriors. If you look at 1,000 of hatchlings that come out, only one will reach sexual maturity. So when you're actually looking at a nesting female, you're looking at a survivor. That turtle had to endure so many things to be there at that time. Some people might actually argue that climate change won't cause an impact for sea turtles. Sea turtles have been around for millions of years, and during this time they have adapted past climatic changes. But there's some factors that are different now. First, the rate of climate change is a lot faster than before, and the population of sea turtles have gone through massive declines in the last decade, so any additional impact will cause them more harm. Second, in the past we think that sea turtles adapted to climate change by redistributing their nesting grounds. But now when you look at the coastline, the majority of the coastline is heavily developed, so there's not a lot of places that sea turtles can adapt and move to. When a sea turtle comes up to nest, it actually spends a lot of energy. It's a big deal to come up. But unfortunately, there's so many impacts to some of the nesting areas that sometimes they'll come up and they won't find an optimal place to nest. And they will end up laying those eggs in places that are not optimal for the incubation, which will mean that those eggs will likely not develop and they'll die.
We're here in the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge, which is our nation's first and only refuge dedicated specifically to the protection of sea turtles.
This is really a remarkable place. It extends for just 20 miles along the mid-Atlantic coastline of Florida. We have natural dunes, we have natural beaches here. They've never been renourished. And what's really amazing is they host about 25 to 30% of all the green sea turtle and loggerhead sea turtle nesting in all of North America.
A lot of folks ask me how sea turtles are doing in Florida, and they have come a long way. And that's a result of 20 years of conservation efforts that have occurred. Sometimes what we do on the beach won't be reflected in those numbers till 20 years later when they return to nest.
The turtle nesting rates at the Archie Carr Refuge have been skyrocketing. Now this is a slow process because it takes 20-odd years for the sea turtle to reach sexual maturity. We're up in the thousands of nests on the Archie Carr Refuge. It is a model of success in wildlife management. There are subdivisions and people living right behind the sea oats, right behind the sea grapes, behind the sand dunes. And so the Archie Carr Refuge literally becomes a model for Florida. If the turtles are nesting and are succeeding in their reproductive behavior, you have a model that is sustainable. And that can be replicated elsewhere in the state.
The idea of wiping out any kind of species of wildlife just for the sake of building subdivisions or high-rises is appalling to most kids, absolutely horrifying. And their recurring question is, how do grown-ups get away with this?
We deserve better. Our country deserves better. My generation deserves better because we're the ones who are going to inherit this mess. And most of all, our planet deserves better.
When they find out about sea level rise, they're going to ask, when did you know and what did you do?
In Broward County, we've been investing very aggressively in planning for climate resiliency, I would say for the last 7 or 8 years. We've advanced massive changes to our comprehensive plan, our land use plan. We've integrated climate resiliency in our budgetary processes. We collectively realized as a region that we were exposed to very significant challenges associated with climate change. So we advanced a regional climate change compact that was that commitment, and then subsequently developed a regional climate change action plan. And while there have been a great number of advancements that are happening in our communities, there is an even greater need for a better organized investment on a statewide level to support all the great investments and planning that's happening locally.
We sure wish that our elected officials in the state capital of Florida had some sort of a plan.
This is a critical issue. State government has got to engage on sound coastal policy and climate policy.
The one thing you have to do is show up. The people who make the decisions about what happens to your coastlines and your beaches and the mangroves and all of that, there are meetings held, there are public hearings held. The special interests, lobbyists will be there, the lawyers will be there, the people that want to change what you're looking at and want to build it and exploit it, and in some cases ruin it, they'll all be there. And you've got to raise your hand and you've got to make some noise and say, this is wrong, we care about this. And when you do that, they hear it.
If we're really going to protect our beach, the people of Florida need to make sure that our coastal development and our coastal planning laws are forward-looking.
Think hard about what you're leaving behind for your kids. What world are they going to inherit? You know, it is in our hands. We can leave our kids a world that's a good place or not. It's our choice.
Long-term beach protection, ensuring that we have a resilient and beautiful beach for my kids, for your kids' kids, can only be done if we all get engaged and we all make sure our government is responding properly.
And it would be heroic at this point, a couple of people, Democrat or Republican, who stand up and say, you know, enough is enough, we've been doing this wrong, we've got huge issues, huge problems, and just who articulated the way so many Floridians feel, the passion about what we've got here.
Sea level rise, it's similar to having a hurricane warning. We have a 72, 48-hour notice before a hurricane is coming. Well, we have a notice that sea level is rising.
To be a Floridian is to enjoy the beaches, and to be a good Floridian is to protect those beaches.
It's time in Florida that we start making smarter decisions. We need to do it now, and we need to do it every time. As we see sea level continue to rise, erosion continue to affect our wonderful beaches, we're going to have to start making hard decisions about what we do. How do we rebuild if there's a storm? Do we rebuild in the same place, or do we start to get smart and think maybe there's a way to manage a retreat from the coast in order to stop fighting and wasting money and destroying the beaches of our wonderful state? We need to understand what's affecting our beaches and the kind of things that we can do to protect those habitats and make sure our elected officials are paying attention and doing the right thing, or we're going to start to lose one of the most important aspects of the state of Florida, and that's our natural sandy beaches.